Hey everybody, I'm Matt Valley, and this is the Rock and Roll Research Podcast, where we share the super cool backstories and side gigs of the research and insights pros that you trust. Today's episode, number 59, in fact, is Greg Park, whom I just met very recently by way of my old colleague and good friend, Craig Rome at Ipsos. Now, Greg has just started at Ipsos. I mean, really just started. What's it been, like 2 weeks, something like that?
Maybe 3.
Maybe 3. Okay. Going on week 3. So Greg just started as the director within the market strategies and understanding group at Ipsos, but he has a really deep expertise, in particular in grocery insights, having come most recently from Giant Food, and before that, Ahold, which is really cool. Lots of changes, I imagine, in the grocery space over the last couple of years. We'll talk about that, but there's something else really cool about Greg. You know, while he was building up his research chops over the years, he was also shredding in a crazy cool East Coast band called Pandas, who put out a record, I understand, played for almost 10 years. And this band, I have to tell you, I've listened to some of the stuff. There's no one like these guys. They just live somewhere in the intersection of punk rock and hardcore and metal and progressive. It's just a whole melting pot of stew that's just crazy cool. So look forward to chatting all about that and more on today's podcast. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, super excited to have you. So I always like to start with research, right? So been doing these two things in parallel, but kind of curious. Everyone's got a different story. How did you find your way into the world of insights and research and analytics?
So a little bit of a roundabout way, and it links up with my musical heavy air quotes here career in a similar way. Which is, you know, my music, you know, is mainly around like goofing off and having fun with my friends, and in the process we make something that sometimes people enjoy. But I went to college for broadcasting and communication studies, and the broadcasting side was because I had spent, you know, my years in high school goofing around with my friends in what was essentially like AV class, right? Wow. So think like late 90s, shooting stupid videos, editing them, and having it count for schoolwork. So I said, this is a lot of fun. I have to go to college, apparently. So what's the closest thing to making dumb videos with my friends? This was all before YouTube, because now making dumb videos with your friends is a very lucrative career path, which I am far too old for.
It's been democratized as well.
Yeah. But it was this broadcasting and comm studies thing. So communication studies, so basically social science stuff. And then broadcasting was just like, you know, technical, you know, video production, video editing. So I came out of college with this, you know, weird amalgam of, you know, video production and social sciences. And this is in central Pennsylvania, where I went to college, in the Lancaster area. Okay. And I just happened to see a job listing for basically my exact resume. There was this little boutique research and innovation consultancy in Lancaster called Innovation Focus. They were working on basically a video mining platform, which is now very accessible. Lots of guys will sell it to you, but at this point, it was like we were building it with duct tape and spit. It's like 2005, 2006, like automated transcription, all that stuff doesn't exist. Right. But they needed somebody who had some degree of, you know, social science background, but also could cut video. And I was like, hi, that's me. That's me. That's exactly me. Yeah. So I went with them, and, you know, gradually, you know, got introduced to more things, you know, ethnography moderation, focus group moderation, a lot of qual stuff. And then moved on to another more boutique consultancy, still in central PA, still a lot of qual. And then I came to the Ahold family where, so Giant Food, Ahold, up and down the East Coast, Food Lion, Giant Food,
Right.
Stop and Shop.
Yep.
And that's really where, I really leaned into quant. You're still doing qual, but, very heavy quant organization. And now I'm at Ipsos doing, qual and quant and, segmentation and those sorts of things. So
Yeah.
started with making dumb videos with my friends, and now, pitching research projects to gigantic companies.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So one follow-up question on that. I'm always interested to hear what people think about the difference between, let's say, the client side and the supplier side. So you've been on both, and now you're moving back to the supplier side. How do you think about that?
So yeah, so one of the reasons I wanted to get off the client side, a little bit of work-life balance stuff. Wanted to get off the vendor side, came to client side. Work-life balance was part of it, but also, when you're on the vendor side, especially where you're not in like a retainer relationship, right. You basically have like, okay, this is my client and I sit with them. It's, moving from project to project. I felt like I was like, I'm not really getting any real depth of understanding from these things, because you're going to do a project for Hershey and you're going to learn a lot about whatever you're working on. But then you kind of have to legally forget that when you move on to your next project with, Kraft, for example. Right. So I wanted to get some depth. And I certainly got that on the client side. But I don't know how much depth I got on the grocery industry. I got much more depth on Giant's particular business. Okay. Because understanding that inside and out was integral to like serving the business and, asking the right questions. But, you become very soaked in what makes sense for their business model, what makes sense for their geography, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Sure. So I think that the depth of what I got on the industry, maybe that's the depth I would have got on just, doing 2 or 3 vendor side projects for a grocery retailer. Okay. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Interesting. Becomes very parochial, right? When you are taking a deep dive with a very specific customer. Cool. All right. So that's what I want to know about. Pandas.
Yeah.
Dude, that was something else. Tell us about how that started. And I got to hear, some of your favorite experiences from your 9 or 10 years playing in that.
Sure. So I was not a founding member of Pandas, but I knew Jordan, the drummer. We went to school together. We hung out. We were friends. And Pandas was a little project. Jordan, Connor, the guitar player, and pretty much the principal kind of songwriter, and then Mike, the bass player. They had been playing together since like high school, but they kind of wanted to move on a little bit, so they wanted another guitar player, and that was me. So I joined the band. They'd been around for like maybe 4 or 5 years, but never really not really recording, not really playing out that much. Just kind of like a just for fun band, playing a couple shows. Making some EPs here and there. Sure. A guy with a 4-track kind of thing. Yeah. So I joined the band, and then we immediately recorded an EP, which was nuts because the songwriting was like nothing I had been prepared for. So it really forced me to really dial up my playing and just thinking about songs in a different way, because especially the earlier songs, it's not like, all right, we've got this riff and we're gonna play that 4 times, and then we're gonna do this riff and we're gonna play that 4 times. It's much more like we're gonna play this riff 2.5 times, and then sandwich that on the back half of this riff, which we're never ever going to play again. And then so it's much more nimble, agile, and distracted, let's say. So really I had to really develop a lot of things. and then we recruited we were just an instrumental band at that point. And then we recruited our vocalist Colin. We were just playing a show in Baltimore at the Auto Bar. No, was it the Auto Bar? Yeah, it was the Auto Bar. That's cool for, I don't know, Baltimore people. And we were playing a song, and Colin, who was in another band at the time, we'd been playing together, he's like, I want to sing this one. And we're like, okay, fine, sure. So he just kind of gets up and just like improvises like a frontman part for the song. We're like, hey, maybe we should get a frontman. So we did. And that really opened up a lot, I think, just because audiences, like, they know how to respond more to a band with a frontman. And also he just had a lot of connections in like the Baltimore and DC scenes. We were able to book a lot more shows, and then we did that for a while, and did an album, a bunch of EPs and splits and that kind of stuff. And then life kind of happened. Although I don't know that if it hadn't, I don't know that we would have survived the pandemic anyway as a band. But yeah, that was Pandas.
Yeah, so give us a little flavor, like maybe a favorite story or two, or I'm curious to know, some of the other bands that you played with.
So I think the biggest band we opened for was Silverstein, who were kind of in that emo screamo world. That was the biggest crowd we ever played for. It was very strange because we went up there, did our stupid thing, and then we're like, you go back to the merch table, you try to sell some t-shirts, but then like all these like children, I mean at this point I was maybe like, this is probably 10 or 15 years ago, so I was like mid-20s, but these kids are like teenagers, right, who come to see this kind of emo band. They're like asking us to sign shit, and like and I'm like, you guys realize like I'm just gonna ride my bike home from this, like I'm nobody, this is nothing, you don't know what's going on. So that was cool. We played it with a lot of more like underground and indie bands. I think my favorite band that we played for, another band that no longer exists, Fang Island, who were just this like incredibly, like, everybody in the band, we loved them. We were just like ripping them off left and right. And we opened for them at this tiny little club in Baltimore called Golden West. And it was just such an amazing experience because they were such a really like, they had such a positive vibe to the shows, and it was just this amazing kind of like, I've never seen a band that had that same kind of energy and vibe, and just being able to like be right up there and like, seeing them, playing with them was really amazing. It was really a great time.
Well, it sounds like you were there at an interesting time in the Baltimore market, because I know that they've really had a moment in kind of your musical space. Had another guest on here who was telling me all about, it was sort of a Baltimore file, if it came from Baltimore, then it was cool. So. Anyway.
Yeah. The Baltimore scene was always so great, because you could be on a bill where it would be like us, and then like a bluegrass act, and then like a hip hop act, and everybody in the crowd was there for every minute of the show.
Yeah.
I always felt like the Baltimore crowds were always just like, whatever you got, if it's good, I want to be here for it. Other scenes a little bit more like, I came here to see a metal show, damn it, give me some metal, or that sort of thing.
That's me sometimes. That's a thing too. Okay, so let me ask just one last question about the band, because the thing that just really struck me listening to your music is this crazy time signatures, changes all over the place, which you really wouldn't usually associate with punk rock. But definitely the stage energy was full on punk rock. What is it that you were trying to do? What were you seeking?
I mean, honestly, we were just trying to have fun.
Yeah.
Like we that was kind of always mission one for us, was to just have a good time playing the songs. So a lot of the reasons the songs are really all over the place is because that was what was like fun and challenging for us to play, right? It was, And, we want to goof around on stage because it's fun for us. But also, I mean, there was a little bit of a strategic, because so many times you go to like a metal show or a hardcore show, and it just seems like the band is just like, they're always just seem like they're angry and mad. And I get it. Like, it's angry and it's mad music, right? But also like we know when we're on stage, we're having a time of our life, right? Like, why should we pretend we're not? And why can't we, one of my favorite bands generally is a band called Foxy Shazam. And they're kind of a punk art rock kind of thing, like a little bit like Queen, if Queen listened to the New York Dolls more. I don't know, bad description. Okay. But one of the things I love about seeing them live is you've got 6 guys on stage, and every single one of them is giving a frontman performance for the whole show. You could just say, you know what, I'm going to watch the bass player, and he's giving more energy and more like on stage performance than most entire bands give. And that's such a great thing to be in the audience for. So like, why not try to do that, right? Why stare at my hands the whole time? Nobody cares. Yeah, makes sense. Cool. So you've had, you've got a foot in 2 different worlds, right? For a number of years. So is there anything that you learned from, let's say, music that you applied to your day job, or maybe vice versa? Yeah, I think, one of the things that, I've an audience, at least in the world I was in, the audience responds to authenticity. I not to say there isn't room for theatricality, especially, we're talking about heavy metal. I mean, like, come on, man, it's like corpse paint and bullet belts. We know there's some theatricality involved, and, we would sometimes get dressed up and do little bits. But I think that there's people respond to authenticity, and they respond to the more artifice you can strip away between you and the audience, the more you're both going to enjoy things. Sure. To a certain degree, right? I mean, that's not to, again, I don't want to shit on theatricality. But, and I think that, whether even just in my professional life, like, moving past artifice just in conversations, just professionally, and just like, look, we're both people here. We're both just having a conversation about how we're going to get through this project. Like, let's strip away, like, okay, you pretend to be a big, strong businessman, and I'll pretend to be a big, strong businessman. But why? And I think that also when you're dealing with other human beings, like in a, kind of a face-to-face research context too, like we're both people, right? Like, the more, let's get rid of all of these boundaries between us about like, I'm going to pretend to be a very professional, smart man. It's like, no, I mean, one of the reasons you're a researcher is because you've figured out how to like understand people and then communicate that to somebody else, right? And if I'm going to understand somebody, like, we have to have some kind of connection. So let's stop pretending and let's just be people. So that's a big part of it. Get authenticity. I think that's what matters. And also, a good skill for a researcher is to know when a respondent isn't quite being honest with you. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to call them out on it, but, you have to think about, okay, they're being kind of performative in this moment. Now, maybe I want to interrogate that, or maybe I just want to sit with that and say, well, why did they feel like they needed to be performative about this? And what does that tell me? Right. Mm-hmm. I think that's a useful skill. Yeah. I love that point. I love the point about authenticity. I think that's so important. Like you said, in both worlds. So, very cool. Yeah. All right. So you have, you've been in a grocery channel for a number of years. Now, sort of broadening back again at Ipsos. It's kind of an interesting background considering the pandemic and all that good stuff. Curious to know, as you sort of look at the research world today, or maybe into the future, what do you see what's important or becoming important? Well, I mean, I think that speed is, it seems like the patients that, and I'm going to say clients, whether we're talking about, the actual clients, or, if you're an internal role, internal clients, the patience that people had for, let's call them traditional market research timelines, seems to be going away.
Yeah.
And I think that's putting a lot of pressure on, especially qualitative research, which just takes more time. Now, luckily, the virtual tools are catching up, right? We were forced to figure this out because of COVID, because you're not going to sit in a room with 6 strangers for a focus group anymore, are you? And there's a lot of, there's a lot of things that those virtual tools bring to the table. It does really cut down timelines, because I don't have to fly to Minneapolis to talk to 6 people who live in Minneapolis. And, you can access these much more quickly and much more cheaply, because we're not buying plane tickets and meals anymore. But I also think that a lot of those virtual tools, they're so new, and we as researchers don't quite fully understand all the ins and outs of them yet. Like, one of the things I've noticed, especially when you're dealing with Zoom or Teams or whatever, is most of us learned how to be on a Zoom call at work. And so that's, we come to Zoom, we come to Teams with our work self, which is a certain kind of self, which is a little different than the kind of self I'd get if we were sitting down at your kitchen table for an in-home interview. And I don't think we fully unpacked that yet. Yeah,
that's a really interesting insight. I haven't thought about that before, but as I go through my head and think about those experiences, I certainly see.
Yeah. And I think we also have to think about, I think it's not to say that, like, traditional focus groups, traditional in-homes are, like, free of bias. Obviously, if you're going to do an in-home interview with somebody, it has to be somebody with a home, and with the authority in their home to bring strangers in and talk, and yeah, that screens some people out, and etc. Focus groups, people who can take 2 hours out of their day to come sit in a room with you. But a virtual focus group over Zoom requires a certain level of hardware in the home, a certain level of comfort, et cetera, et cetera. There are those things. And yeah, I'm not sure we've fully digested them as a research community yet.
Yeah, I think you're spot on about that. Cool. So this is a podcast, right? And I know that you have a podcast as well. So I do a little bit about that. But let's start with curious to know what other media, could be podcasts, could be something else, that you turn to for inspiration, professionally or personally, or enjoyment.
Well, in terms of podcasts, so I don't typically, podcasts I listen to mainly I listen for, like, news and political commentary. That's just the kind of stuff I like to have. So, so in that, it's, what do I listen to most regularly? Probably Chapo and Majority Report with Sam Cedar. So those are podcast wise. In terms of, like, musical inspiration, that's really tough, because on one hand, like, you want to listen to things to give you ideas. On the other hand, you don't want to listen so much that you're just ripping somebody off.
Right.
But musically, I've been, like, my current kind of musical project, which doesn't exist in the real world that anyone can listen to yet, but been kind of looking into more, like, atmospheric, vibe-based stuff. So I've been listening to a lot of, like, doom and black metal. Yes. I see. Throwing the goat. Hail Satan. But artistic inspiration, honestly, and I hate saying things like this, but, like, nature. Like, I like to get out and, go for long hikes and trail runs and stuff. And there's something about the silence and the stillness that brings me something. Professionally, I try to leave the job at 5 o'clock. But I also like to go out and I like to see kind of passively how other and again, I'm still kind of in retail world, like how other retailers are doing their surveys, and all of a sudden the pin pad at the checkout has a survey on it, and I'm like, oh, that's awful. And trying to suss out from those little interactions, like, okay, what does Target care about if they're giving me this survey? What do they care about? What are they using? And I kind of like to do that kind of like detective work a little bit.
Cool. Makes sense. All right, so this is the Rock and Roll Research Podcast, right? And I am dying to ask this question of you, having heard your music, and just got some ideas of what the answers might be to this. But very important question. So you're stranded on a desert island, Greg. You have 3 records at your disposal of your choosing to keep you company for the rest of your days. What are those records?
Okay. First one, I'm going to cheat a little bit. The first one is...
everybody tries to cheat this question.
So I wanted to say the album Alaska by Between the Buried and Me, because it contains the track Selkie's The Endless Obsession, which contains a guitar solo that to this day makes me cry every time I hear it. But I don't really like it as an album. But I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't mention Between the Buried and Me. But I'm going to pick the album Colors, because I generally consider it to be their best work, but this is like progressive, technical metal. But it came out like kind of right at what I would call like Pandas like most creatively fertile time, and also right around the time where we were like doing the most touring, playing the most shows. So like I have a lot of strong nostalgia associated with that, of like just like the best years of the band. And also it's a phenomenal record, but it doesn't have that solo on it, so that's how I cheated.
Okay. Duly noted.
Yeah. So the next one is, because I felt like again, if I'm on a desert island, it can't be all metal.
Why not? No, okay. No, I get your point.
Because sometimes you need a break. Sometimes you got to bring the heart rate down. So that is the album No More Shall We Part by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds.
Oh, yes. I love that album.
Yeah. Not generally like the critical consensus on the Nick Cave, but it was probably for me the first album of his that I really like, that really clicked for me. Mm-hmm. And just when I think about like which Nick Cave record has the most like songs that I just like love, it's No More Shall We Part. So awesome. He was actually the last proper show I saw before the pandemic. Actually, he played the Anthem in DC. He doesn't tour the States that often, so I was like, I gotta go. Whatever happens, I gotta go. Who knows how many years he has left.
Incredible live.
Yeah. I mean, he's been at it for 5 decades now. So, but yeah, great performer. And the last one is it's by the band Yob, Y-O-B. Our Raw Heart. I think he meant like 2018, but like every time I put it on, I'm like, oh, I feel like it was like this year. Yob is and Mike Scheidt, he's basically the band. But as a guitar player and a songwriter, like he's kind of like my mentor right now, even though he doesn't know it. But and people who like Yob will tell you that they're kind of like a doom metal band, kind of like a sludge band, but there's something about their performance, something about their songwriting that has this kind of spiritual dimension that is so rare in metal, beyond the kind of performative spirituality of like the Hail Satan stuff. But like there's a genuine connection there. And also once I started to kind of unpack what he was doing on the guitar, it really has just like completely just like blew my brains against the wall of his approach to technique, and the instrument itself is really like I'm falling in love with the instrument all over again, if that makes sense. So Our Raw Heart. Everybody should listen to it. It's pretty incredible.
Cool. I haven't heard that, so I'm definitely going to check that out. You get major bonus points for having 2/3 metal on your Desert Island disc. That puts you in some rare company of the 59 podcasts I've had so far. So that's awesome. Great to hear. Excellent. Thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today, Greg. I do want to say one thing. I'm wearing this Minnesota shirt because I'm repping my hometown. I actually have a gig myself on Saturday night with my punk band, Chumleys. So I'll be talking to lots of metalheads while I'm there. So I'm going to ask about this record. So
I mean, it's there. I mean, they're not completely underground, but you got to get a couple layers down. Like you got to get from Neurosis to Pallbearer to Yob. And then there's a couple more layers down. Like once we get to Bellwitch and we're really talking about doom, but you might not. Yob might still be a little cult.
Awesome, super cool. Well, thanks so much for your time, Greg. I'm super glad we met. Let's definitely keep in touch because I think we've got some stuff to talk. So thanks so much. Rock and roll. All right.
Oh, right. It's the audio medium.
Rock and roll.